A cold wind curled across the battlements of the Red Keep, creeping over stone and mortar like a lingering spirit. In that crispness lay an echo of the north, and sometimes, when the wind twisted just right, Jon Snow could almost taste the memory of home. He stood at the highest parapet, a place he had found for solitude, his thick fur cloak drawn tight about his shoulders. Below him stretched King's Landing. Fires winked and glowed in the distance. There was laughter echoing from a courtyard somewhere deep in the city, and the faint ring of hammers from blacksmiths who never slept. It was a new age, or so people claimed, but old anxieties had a way of lingering. He pressed his palm flat against the cool stone of the rampart, as though he might glean some hidden truth from the ancient masonry beneath his fingers. He had never truly wanted to be a king, yet fate and circumstance had delivered him here. Jon of House Targaryen in name, but never in heart, recognized across the realm as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Though many saw him as no more than Ned Stark's honorable bastard, elevated by war, the truth had come out, propelled by half-whispered confessions, revelations from Samwell Tarly, and the swirl of events that no single person had been able to control. The truth had not settled easily, nor had the throne. But the realm needed unity, needed someone who understood war's cost. Jon had accepted it with reluctance, determined to carry that burden with whatever dignity he could muster. Not long had passed since the Raven from the Citadel had announced the end of the long night in the far north. The White Walkers were gone, the greatest threat the realm had ever known. Peace, or something like it, had arrived. Yet the cost was visible everywhere. Smoldering ruins in the city, scattered families, and quiet sorrow in the eyes of those who had seen too much blood. That sense of loss followed him through the Red Keep's corridors, haunted him in every discussion of future alliances, lingered whenever he closed his eyes at night. Perhaps that was why he found some comfort in Tyrion Lannister's presence. The imp of Casterly Rock, once scorned, once reviled for his last name, was now the king's hand. Strange alliances had sprung from stranger times. Tyrion Lannister had not wanted to linger in power. He had been bruised, inside and out, from previous positions at court. His silver hair was receding further, the bitterness on his face carved deeper by defeat after defeat. He carried guilt for decisions that had led to so many dead. Yet it was Tyrion's mind and shrewdness, allied with his inherent empathy for the downtrodden, that Jon needed. The king was a man of honor, too often distrusting of political maneuvering. Tyrion was a man who maneuvered almost by instinct. Jon needed that. When he offered the Hand's title to Tyrion, it had been with a quiet sense of certainty that he was doing the right thing for once. And Tyrion, at length, had accepted. A slow footfall reminded Jon that he was not alone at his vantage point. He turned. Tyrion appeared at his side, wearing layers of dark velvet that gave him a somewhat severe profile. He had chosen black, as many in the Red Keep did now, perhaps a nod to the Stark or Targaryen colors. A pin shaped like the hand of the king caught the moonlight. "You look like a man who hasn't slept in days," Tyrion said, resting his hands on the edge of the wall. "Though, given your new occupation, that makes sense." Jon exhaled a faint laugh, though there was little humor in it. "It's different, being here instead of the north. A city this large. It never truly sleeps." Tyrion nodded, his gaze drifting over the city below. "I was born in a place of power and politics, and yet King's Landing still amazes me. The smell, the heat, the endless plots. It's a living creature, and it's hungry." They stood side by side in silence for a time. The wind threatened to snatch away any warmth from their breath. When at last Jon spoke, his voice was subdued, as if he did not wish to disturb the quiet. "We have a realm to rebuild, Tyrion. People expect miracles overnight." "People always expect miracles of rulers," Tyrion replied. "They rarely come about. Real progress is slow, tedious, and rarely recognized by the masses. Still, we'll give them what we can. Each sunrise, a new plan. Each dusk, a careful tally of successes and failures." Jon nodded. The idea of day-by-day incremental progress felt more comforting than any pretense of sweeping changes. The weight on his shoulders was great enough without the illusions of immediate solutions. They took the stairs down, each step echoing. Jon's dark curls stirred around his face as he glanced at Tyrion. Tomorrow we host several lords to speak of taxes, harvests, and supply lines to the Riverlands. You'll be there." It was not truly a question, more a statement. Tyrion answered with a slight roll of his shoulders. "I'm your hand. Where else should I be?" "No." The next day dawned with a pallid sun that struggled through low clouds. Within the Red Keep, the throne room was cleared and prepared for a morning of court. Word had spread that King Jon was not a man to show off the power of the monarchy with flamboyant ceremonies. Instead, he used the throne room for practicality, a place to gather officials, hear supplicants, and occasionally pass judgments when necessary. The morning hush was broken by the shuffle of boots on marble, the rustling of fine clothes, and the inevitable murmur of voices as lords, ladies, and other persons of import made their way inside. Jon's seat was not the Iron Throne. He still felt ill at ease whenever he climbed those twisted metal steps. Instead, for daily audiences, he had a simpler chair placed beneath the high windows. That chair was wrought of plain wood with minimal carvings. A symbolic gesture, Tyrion had said. The king was not here to instill fear by metal swords, hammered together with the memory of conquest. He was here to serve. Tyrion believed these small things mattered. Jon was not entirely convinced, but he trusted Tyrion's instinct for what might calm those newly reacquainted with peace. Tyrion took his place at Jon's right hand, standing just behind the seat, close enough to whisper counsel if needed, far enough not to overshadow. It was a delicate dance, one the dwarf knew all too well. His eyes flickered from face to face, reading moods, catching hints of anxiety or ambition, a skill sharpened by years of survival among more dangerous courts. Lords from the Crownlands were first, kneeling, some more convincingly than others, to pledge their continuing loyalty. They asked for shipments of grain, they asked for royal hunts, they asked for laborers to help rebuild. Jon tried to address their needs with fairness. Tyrion would occasionally lean in to remind him of a previous request, or to suggest sending a swift rider to this or that region. The morning passed in a slow, methodical swirl of courtesies and demands. At midday, a short respite came. The officials filed out, leaving only the scattered remains of their footprints on the polished floor. Jon, rising from the wooden seat, pressed a hand to the small of his back. Even with only a few hours in that chair, he felt the tension in his bones. Tyrion's eyes flitted over him. "And that's only a fraction of the realm, Your Grace. Wait until the lords of the Stormlands or the Westerlands start piling in with half their retinues demanding an audience." Jon shook his head. "This is the work I must do if I'm to lead. And don't call me Your Grace." "Now, we're in public," Tyrion said lightly, though nobody else was in earshot. Then he offered a small smirk, the corners of his mouth tugging down in that self-deprecating way. "In private, we can revert to exchanging insults if you'd prefer." Jon breathed out a rare, faint chuckle. "It's enough that you haven't called me a bastard in at least a fortnight." Tyrion's smirk softened. "We've both learned that bloodlines are complicated, Jon. And in any case, you're not a bastard. Not by law, not by birth, not by name. Though I doubt you take much comfort in that. There's little comfort in it. But if it helps the realm see me as something worth following, so be it." The hush of the throne room allowed their voices to drift softly. They stepped aside, where a small table had been placed with pitchers of water and wine. Tyrion poured himself a cup of wine. Jon took water. The king's eyes slid over the tapestries, still marred by soot near the vaulted ceiling. An old reminder of the chaos that had befallen the city. Though the physical damage had been largely repaired, the lingering scars in the hearts of the people would take longer to heal. Jon silently took a sip of water. Before more conversations could unfurl, the heavy doors opened again, admitting a steward who bowed apologetically. "My lords, there is a visitor, Sir Garland Tyrell from Highgarden, requesting an immediate audience on a matter of urgent importance." Tyrion and Jon exchanged a glance. "Send him in," Jon said, squaring his shoulders. In came a tall, broad-shouldered knight wearing garb of the new Tyrell lineage. The rose emblem was combined with golden inlays, a testament to the wealth that Highgarden still possessed, even after the tragedies of war. Garland Tyrell, a cousin of the long-perished Margaery and Loras. was one of the last credible heirs to the Tyrell name, a line carefully re-established to restore the reach. He approached and knelt, pressing a fist to his chest. Jon bid him rise. Garland bowed respectfully to Jon, then to Tyrion. His voice, when he spoke, quivered slightly with urgency. "Your Grace, my Lord Hand, I come bearing concerns about bandit raids near the borders of the Reach. We thought the problem was resolved, but in recent weeks, armed groups, undoubtedly men who deserted from some warband or another, have taken to attacking caravans traveling along the Roserat." "Desai." Tyrion, clasping his hands behind his back, narrowed his gaze. "Armed groups? Are they rumored to follow any particular cause?" Garland shook his head. "None that we can see. They fly no banners. They ride in small numbers, but they strike swiftly. They take grain, horses, valuables, and vanish before any muster can arrive." Jon considered. "How many caravans have been hit?" "4. So far that we know of." "The news spreads fear. Merchants are hesitant to travel unescorted. We risk losing trade connections if we can't guarantee their safety." Tyrion's attention turned to Jon. "Bandits are always an issue after war. Armed men with no lords left or no desire to serve. But we need a coordinated response to ensure commerce doesn't dry up." Jon nodded. "We can dispatch some of the Crown's men, or request that the local lords muster a guard for the roads." Sir Garland respectfully cleared his throat. "If it please you, my king, Highgarden can handle a portion of the patrol if we're granted a stipend of supplies from the Crown. Our resources are already stretched from harvest disruptions." Jon turned to Tyrion. "You're the Hand. Do you think we can spare the supplies to help Highgarden defend its roads?" Tyrion rubbed his chin. "We could allocate some resources, though we must ensure the Crown's own coffers don't run empty. Let's propose a moderate supply of grains from the Crown stores, enough to keep your men well provisioned. In exchange, Highgarden focuses on clearing the roads within your domain." "Nos." Garland nodded, relief evident on his face. "Thank you, my Lord Hand, your Grace. The Reach is loyal to the throne." Jon offered a small inclination of his head. "See that the roads are safe. We need trade to flourish. If you need further support, send a raven. I'll do what I can." The tall knight bowed once more and departed, leaving the throne room quiet once again. When the doors closed behind him, Jon blew out a slow breath. "They come to you with their problems," Tyrion observed. "But we are equally reliant on them. You see how delicate a balance it is." Jon let a corner of his mouth curl in a faint wry expression. "It seems all things are a delicate balance these days." The day continued in much the same fashion. A small wave of issues, from petty squabbles to urgent concerns. And behind each decision, Tyrion whispered advice. Jon weighed the counsel in his mind, tried to keep the best interests of the people at heart, and passed his judgments. That evening, after the last supplicant had departed, the king and his Hand found themselves in one of the smaller solar chambers. The walls were hung with faded golden drapes that might once have belonged to House Lannister, but had been stripped of sigils. A single table was set with a simple meal: roast duck, fresh bread, and a bowl of diced apples. A pitcher of wine also sat in the center, condensation beading on its flank. Tyrion wasted no time pouring himself a generous cup. To the first day completed without any major calamities, he toasted wryly. Jon picked at a piece of bread. "Small steps," he said quietly, echoing Tyrion's words from the night before. They ate in near silence for a few moments. The hush was not exactly uncomfortable, but it carried an undercurrent of mutual exhaustion. The day had felt longer than it was. Tyrion eventually cleared his throat. "How are you holding up, Jon?" "Truly." Jon peered at him over a piece of bread. "I can't complain. So many others have suffered. I've had my share of hardships, but I'm alive. I'm king. I'm not sure how I feel about that." "You sound almost guilty." "I am guilty," Jon answered. "I feel as though I stepped into a role that was only mine by birth, not by merit." "It's not a comforting thought." Tyrion's lips twitched. "Not many kings take the throne because they deserve it, Jon. If the realm can be stable under your rule, that's what matters. At least you don't relish power. That alone sets you apart from most men who have sat on that throne." John stared down at the torn piece of bread in his hand, as though it held some hidden wisdom. You once served as hand to Daenerys. Now you're serving me. The statement hung in the air, carrying echoes of old wounds. Tyrion's hand tightened around his wine cup. He did not avert his gaze. I did, yes. I know that memory is painful. It is, Tyrion admitted softly. I believed in her. I believed in the idea of breaking chains, forging a better world. But sometimes, one person's dream is another's nightmare. He took a slow sip of wine and set the cup down carefully. I learned that good intentions can pave a road to horror if we ignore the warning signs. I still believe in many of her ideals: justice, compassion, freedom. But I also believe in accountability. Perhaps we can build that better world the right way, or at least try. Bendo. John exhaled, his shoulders sagging a fraction. She wanted a new world. I want the same. But every day I learn that the path is not so straightforward. The people here have so many needs, and the lords all have their own agendas. Tyrion put on a faint, ironic smile. That's precisely why you have me. Then, after a pause, he added, and that's precisely why I'm honored to be your hand. I see what you want, and it's not a throne or personal glory. You want peace. You want the people to have something like happiness. John said nothing but met Tyrion's gaze. There was a moment of understanding between them. Two men shaped by war, by betrayal, by necessity, standing on the precipice of a new age neither fully comprehended. They finished their meal. Tyrion lingered to finish his wine, while John excused himself to retire. It was well past dark, and tomorrow promised more of the same. But the next day dawned with a complication. A hush spread through the Red Keep's hallways. A hush that carried tension, as though some ill omen had drifted in on the night wind. Servants rushed about with nervous looks, whispering tidbits of rumor. By the time John and Tyrion convened in the council chamber, a smaller room with a circular table where the king's small council held session, they discovered they were not alone. Standing by the windows, overshadowed by the morning light, was a tall figure with dark hair, a green cloak pinned at one shoulder, and a face sharpened by old heartbreak. Lord Gendry Baratheon, newly recognized as the legitimate Lord of Storm's End, had arrived unannounced. His eyes met Jon's with a flicker of something akin to relief. He gave a respectful bow. "Your Grace, my Lord Hand," he said, not unkindly, but his voice was tight, brimming with frustration. "I wouldn't have come so abruptly, but I received word that men under your command have begun traversing the Stormlands without my permission. Not as bandits, no, but as a presence that my lords are questioning. They wonder if the crown mistrusts them." Jon's brow furrowed. "I gave no orders for men to move into the Stormlands, Lord Gendry." Tyrion looked equally perplexed. "Nor I. Are you certain of these reports?" Gendry nodded solemnly. "We caught sight of them near the King's Road fork. They were the crown's colors, or so said my men. But I found it strange, since the Stormlands have not requested help, nor have we threatened the throne." Jon and Tyrion exchanged glances. This smelled like a misunderstanding at best, or a subterfuge at worst. Jon gestured for Gendry to come to the table. "We'll sort this out. Are you certain they wore the crown's insignia, not some forgers?" "Do none?" "And that was the claim," Gendry answered, his broad shoulders tensing. "I've come to ask for an explanation, or at least cooperation in identifying these men." Tyrion leaned over, resting his elbows on the table. Could they be men loyal to the old regime? Some leftover loyalists to Cersei or another claimant? Trying to stir up trouble and pin the blame on the crown? The city was in chaos for a time. It's not impossible they acquired some uniforms or standard. Jon's expression hardened. "We need to find out who they are and stop them." Gendry nodded, relaxing slightly. "I don't intend to question your authority, Your Grace. I only want to ensure the Stormlands aren't falling prey to some ploy. I understand. If men are marching in my name without my knowledge, I need to discover who is giving the orders." Jon exchanged a look with Tyrion, who set his jaw. Tyrion tapped a finger on the table. "Perhaps we should send an investigator, someone we trust, to quietly gather information. Meanwhile, we send a raven to your castellan, Gendry. to reassure the Stormlands. Let them know the Crown is not deploying troops to their lands without cause. Don't so. Gendry breathed a hint of relief. Thank you, Tyrion. Yes, that would help calm my lords. If you like, I can lead an expedition back and attempt to locate these men, question them, or... He hesitated, uncertain if he was overstepping. Jon glanced at Tyrion. The dwarf offered a slight shrug of agreement. It might be best if you lead the search, Jon said to Gendry. You know the terrain, and your men know the local roads and villages. Gendry gave a firm nod. I'll head out as soon as I have your blessing. The Stormlands are loyal to you, Jon. He used Jon's name rather than the formal Your Grace, perhaps a slip back into the friendship they had forged years before. I'll let no rumor or false banner disrupt our peace. Jon placed a hand on Gendry's shoulder momentarily, a gesture of trust. Go, Dayton. Take a force you deem necessary. Keep me updated. Send ravens daily if you can. Once we know who these men are, we'll deal with them accordingly. One. That moment of solidarity passed between them. Two men who had survived countless perils, now forging alliances in the uncertain peace that followed the war. Gendry took his leave, moving with the purposeful stride of a blacksmith turned lord. When the chamber door closed behind him, Tyrion pursed his lips. This might be an isolated incident, but the timing is suspicious. We must be careful. The realm barely stands united as it is. Any sign of the crown overstepping its authority could fracture alliances. Nampity Jawan. It's Tapo. Jon gave a grim nod. I know. Thank you for your counsel. They carried on with the morning's business, meeting with members of the small council, discussing appointments to the city watch, trying to reorganize the treasury. Tyrion fielded many of the financial concerns with a practiced ease, while Jon's simpler approach served as a moral compass, ensuring that decisions didn't line the pockets of the powerful at the expense of the powerless. A handful of times, Tyrion would drop a subtle comment, referencing a major decision in a way that tested Jon's reaction. And each time, Jon would carefully weigh the potential impact on the common folk. Such was their synergy. Tyrion with his cunning, Jon with his earnest sense of responsibility. Perhaps it was not perfect, but it was far from the chaos the city had known in previous years. Outside, the day turned to a slate-colored afternoon. Clouds drifted over the city, threatening rain. The shift in the weather cast a gloom through the windows, and torches were lit early in the corridors of the keep. Jon emerged from the small council meeting, shoulders heavy, accompanied by Tyrion, who seemed to be massaging a tension headache at his temple. Remember, Tyrion muttered as they walked. Tonight, we have a dinner with the ambassadors from Bravos. We can't afford to appear disinterested in their banking opportunities. We need coin to rebuild the fleets and re-establish trade routes. Jon exhaled, adjusting the collar of his cloak. I haven't forgotten, though I doubt the Iron Bank is inclined to lend us more gold. Den Sumdo. The Iron Bank invests where it believes profit can be found, Tyrion replied. If the crown shows stability, they'll want to be on our good side. We just have to be persuasive. Jon nearly let out a reluctant sigh. He hated these social performances, but as he often reminded himself, if it helped the realm, he would do it 100 times over. Fine, I'll be there. They reached one of the private corridors that led to Jon's chambers. You should rest for a time, Tyrion suggested, noticing the tired lines at Jon's eyes. Jon nodded vaguely. Perhaps. Let me know the moment Gendry sends a raven. If these rogue soldiers truly are marching in the crown's colors, we need to address it quickly. Tyrion inclined his head. Of course, Your Grace. His tone was more official. It was a subtle habit of his. When Jon was about to take his leave, Tyrion often reasserted that courtesy, making clear that he was the hand, and Jon was the king. It was an odd reflection of the new world they inhabited. They were no longer simply the dwarf with a quick wit, and the bastard of the north, swapping terse banter at the wall. They were the two most powerful men in the realm. Jon slipped into his chambers. A small hearth burned in the corner, but the warmth never seemed to fully chase away the chill in his bones. He thought again of the north, of Winterfell's great hall, of Ghost curling up near the fire. He had left his direwolf there, believing King's Landing was no place for such a creature. At times, he regretted that decision, missing the silent companionship that had defined so much of his life. But it was for the best, he told himself. Let Ghost roam the familiar forests, while Jon navigated the labyrinth of politics. He thought of Sansa, too, who now governed the north with the composure of a true Stark. They exchanged ravens often. She counseled him to watch for subtle manipulations, to keep his own counsel close. In return, he advised her on forging alliances with the neighboring lords. The north was nominally part of the realm again, though Sansa had demanded, and received, certain freedoms. He suspected Tyrion's diplomatic hand had assisted with that arrangement. Even after their tumultuous past, Tyrion and Sansa shared a cautious respect for one another, shaped by mutual survival. Jon did not manage to rest for long. The demands on his time permitted only a short respite before the dinner with the Braavosi ambassadors. He dressed in formal black garments trimmed with silver, a small nod to the Targaryen lineage that everyone seemed so fixated on. The dining hall within the Red Keep had been arranged more modestly than in previous reigns. No towering golden candelabras, no lavish tapestries. Tyrion insisted that such ostentation only widened the gulf between the monarchy and the people. Instead, they aimed for understated elegance. The Braavosi arrived, a delegation of 3. A tall woman with thin, calculating eyes, and 2 men who flanked her, their beards neatly trimmed. They wore clothes of fine fabric but minimal adornment, a testament to Braavos' practical bent. They greeted Jon and Tyrion politely, and the dinner commenced in a swirl of measured conversation. Tyrion did most of the talking. He was in his element, praising Braavos' shipping routes, extolling the success of cooperation in trade. Jon watched quietly, chiming in when necessary, offering thanks for the past assistance Braavos had extended. At one point, the lead ambassador turned to Jon and inquired directly, "Your Grace, do you foresee large-scale expansions of your navy now that the wars are done?" Jon took a moment to consider his words. "I foresee the need for a steady naval presence to ensure free trade routes, but not an aggressive expansion. Our focus is rebuilding the interior. Roads, farmland, the city's infrastructure. The people come first. However, we will need ships to protect commerce, so any shipwrights or partnerships the Iron Bank can help secure would be welcomed." "Nabito." Tyrion sipped his wine, satisfied with the king's response. The ambassadors exchanged glances that suggested their thoughts were churning in time with potential profit. "I imagine," Tyrion added, "that Braavos would have interest in a stable Westeros that can repay its debts and foster trade. The Iron Bank invests in success, yes? We intend to succeed." The negotiations were far from concluded that evening, but a cordial foundation was laid. After the Braavosi departed, Tyrion and Jon were left in the dining hall, the remnants of supper scattered across the table. Tyrion reached for one last swallow of wine. "They'll want a formal agreement," he said. "A guarantee of interest on any loans, and possibly an arrangement for them to have favored status at our ports." Jon nodded, rising to stand by the tall windows. The storm that had threatened all day had finally broken. Rain lashed against the panes. "We'll negotiate. As long as it doesn't chain us to crippling debt. The realm can't bear that." "And see." "Of course," Tyrion said softly, swirling the wine in his cup, as though watching the reflections of the candlelight. He seemed lost in a brief reverie. Then he offered Jon a small smile. "We're making progress, even if it's slow." Jon said nothing, but gazed into the rain-swept darkness. The city's distant lights shimmered like ghosts through the downpour. The hush of the hall pressed in, reminding him how many miles he was from his northern home. Still, he felt the slightest flicker of hope in his chest. Maybe they truly could shape a better tomorrow. But he also felt the stirring of old fears, that duty and necessity might one day overshadow compassion, that the ambition of others might force his hand, that the crown's weight would grow heavier with each new dawn. He closed his eyes and turned from the window, focusing on what was within reach. Tyrion's counsel, the budding alliances, and the promise he had made to himself to never forget the lives of ordinary people. He reminded himself that for now, that had to be enough. The days pressed on, each similar to the last in its demands and intricacies. Rebuilding required tireless work from every corner of the realm. Tyrion spent hours immersed in ledgers and accounts, meeting with clerks and emissaries. Jon juggled an ever-swelling tide of concerns: angry lords who felt overlooked, common folk who came to plead for justice, travelers wanting trade permits. Occasionally, glimmers of good news arrived. A repaired stretch of road here, a storehouse restocked there, a recovered harvest. And always, within the Red Keep, the presence of the new king and his hand shaped the atmosphere. Rumors spread of Jon Snow's honesty, of Tyrion Lannister's cunning. In the taverns and markets, stories intermingled. Some hailed Jon as the rightful Targaryen heir, who had refused to let the city burn. Others whispered that a Stark now sat the throne in all but name, that Winter's wolf had come south to restore order. Tyrion's reputation was equally mixed. Some saw him as a schemer of the highest order. Others admired his intelligence and credited him with keeping the new reign from sliding into tyranny. Their routine was punctured one late afternoon when a raven arrived from the Stormlands. It was handed to Tyrion, who found Jon in the library, poring over old records of King's Landing's water systems. The library was dimly lit, lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes that smelled faintly of dust and old parchment. Tyrion cleared his throat, scanning the words on the scroll. From Gendry, he's found the men responsible for wearing the crown's sigil in the Stormlands. And Sihor. Jon rose from his reading, stepping closer. And? They claim they served the crown under Queen Cersei, deserted near the end of the war, and took to raiding. They brandished the royal insignia to scare off local villagers, letting them believe they had the king's blessing. Gendry apprehended them near a small hamlet. He's holding them at Storm's End, awaiting your judgment. Jon nodded slowly. So they were just deserters turned bandits. Not an organized effort. Mektimor. That's what it seems, Tyrion answered, rolling the parchment back. Though Gendry suggests we make an example of them. If the realm is to remain stable, men who pretend to serve the crown while wreaking havoc must be punished. Jon pressed his lips into a thin line. He took no joy in punishment. He recalled the day he had to behead a deserter from the Night's Watch. Ned Stark's voice echoed in his memory. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. He wondered if that sense of direct responsibility would still hold here, in a kingdom as vast and complicated as this. Nonetheless, decisions had to be made. We'll have them brought here, he decided. They deserted during the war, but the war is over. They tried to use the crown's name for brigandage. Let them stand trial in King's Landing. If we're to unify the realm, we must show that no one can misuse the king's authority. Tyrion inclined his head. A public trial, then a sentence. That will send the message clearly. Jon's gaze lingered on the worn spine of a volume titled History of the Seven Kingdoms. He felt the intangible weight of all those kings and queens who had ruled before him, the choices they had made, the blood they had spilled. We'll do what must be done, he murmured. Inform Gendry. In the following days, as the outlaws were brought north in chains, the rest of the realm's affairs continued. On occasion, in quieter hours, Jon Tyrion would walk along the keep's corridors and speak in hushed tones of what lay ahead. When they reached the top of the ramparts, the city sprawled below, battered but alive. Sometimes Tyrion would remark on how the Street of Steel was seeing an upsurge in blacksmithing business, or how the fishmongers by the docks were slowly recovering. And each piece of good news seemed to spark in Jon a cautious sense of optimism. Beyond the city, the illusions of peace were tested by remnants of old resentments. Some lords in the Westerlands were slow to trust a Targaryen king, particularly one who had once worn black and carried a bastard name. In the Vale, the boy lord who had once known Sansa and Littlefinger still clung to independence, though he recognized Jon as king, at least on paper. The Iron Islands had crowned their own queen, Yara Greyjoy, who pledged to keep her seas free, but offered no illusions of docile compliance. Dorne was quiet, reeling from the devastation that had befallen them before the war's end, but tension simmered. Jon saw it all as a precarious puzzle, each piece needing to be set in place carefully lest the entire realm break apart again. Tyrion often joined him in the evenings for a simple meal. They would share updates, sign letters, and arrange for the next day's audiences. They learned each other's moods, recognized when the other was weary or eager. On some nights, Tyrion might regale Jon with a short anecdote from his youth, rarely a happy one, but told with a sardonic wit that could coax a reluctant smile from the king. On other nights, Jon would recall life at the Wall, or mention fleeting memories of Eddard Stark, reminding himself why he strove to be an honorable ruler. It was an uneasy synergy, forging new ways. But day by day, they pressed forward, determined to bring about an era of reconstruction and hope. And if the burden weighed heavily on their shoulders, neither man faltered. Each found in the Uter's presence a reminder of why they had come this far, and why they must not fail. And so the nights continued, and the dawns came, each heralding another round of judgments and negotiations. With Tyrion's cunning and Jon's steadfast sense of justice, they formed a precarious bulwark against the chaos that threatened the realm. Each step felt like a seed planted in uncertain soil, but in the crisp air wafting from the narrow windows of the Red Keep, one could almost sense the hint of new growth. Tyrion would say, when they parted ways to retire, "Progress 1 inch at a time." And Jon, lingering at the threshold of his chamber, would nod in agreement, shoulders tense from the day's trials but resolute. There was no telling if they would succeed ultimately. But for now, at least, the wheels of the kingdom turned without sliding back into war. The city breathed, the roads reopened, and hopes flickered like tiny candle flames in the dark. Sometimes, late at night, Jon would return to that high parapet, overlooking the city. In the stillness, he would let the memory of the North fill his lungs, half recalling the cold purity of Winterfell's yard. The responsibilities here were far heavier than anything he had borne before, and there were nights when the weight of the crown seemed too much. But he was not alone. Tyrion's presence, and the presence of allies across the realm, offered a form of support he had once thought impossible. He would stand there, letting the wind whip at his cloak, the moon casting a pale glow over the rooftops, and he would think of what might be, what must be. Tyrion, with all his flaws and all his brilliance, stood with him. The memory of old kings haunted him. The future waited, unformed and fragile. But Jon Snow had faced the Night King in battle, had confronted dragons and armies of the dead. He would not shy away from a mortal challenge, however vast. Dawn would find him bleary-eyed but determined, descending the same stone steps to greet Tyrion in the council chambers. Another day would unfold, with small steps toward the realm's healing, each decision a brick in the foundation of a new age. Tyrion would greet him with a tired nod, passing along the morning's letters, murmuring something sardonic about the burdens of rule. Jon would half smile in acknowledgement, scanning the pages before them. Pleas for trade, news from the north, updates on the Reach's harvest, requests for justice from a village near Harrenhal. Each matter a piece of the puzzle. Slowly, meticulously, they placed those pieces, shaping a reality far from perfect, but hopefully better than the darkness that had come before. The king's hand was no saint, and the king himself was a reluctant ruler. But in this alliance, there was a seed of genuine hope. The realm had known so much bloodshed that the common folk barely dared to believe in lasting peace. Yet with each ruling, each supply caravan dispatched to a starving region, each negotiated settlement between feuding lords, a glimmer of trust began to grow. They faced whispers of rebellion, shadows of old grudges, and the looming specter of new threats yet unknown. But they faced them together, forging a path neither could have navigated alone. And that was the shape of things to come. Jon Snow, King of Westeros, and Tyrion Lannister, his hand, walking the fine line between duty and destiny, leading a realm that needed them, whether or not it fully trusted them yet. In the uncertain hush after great wars, they labored to write a new chapter, step by cautious step, day by relentless day. And high above the Red Keep's parapets, the winds of change howled, as if to herald the turning of an era. Rain continued to lash the city for 2 days, a steady drumming against the Red Keep's windows. It was the kind of cold, soaking deluge that made the stone corridors feel chilled to the marrow. the braziers in every hallway struggling to keep a semblance of warmth. Jon found the sound oddly soothing at night, when he lay in his chamber and let the patter of droplets lull him into a fitful sleep. It reminded him of the North's relentless winters, of the way storms would roll in and stay for days, forcing everyone indoors to wait with quiet patience. Yet here, instead of wind-whipped pine forests, there were spires of stone and flickering torches, the dull hum of city life that never truly slept. On the morning, the prisoners arrived from the Stormlands. The rain finally broke, leaving the sky a bright pale gray. Word drifted through the Red Keep that Lord Gendry's men had reached the city gates. Jon and Tyrion assembled in the throne room shortly after dawn, waiting. Servants scurried about, setting benches for the onlookers and ensuring the floor was clean. A handful of gold cloaks and members of the Kingsguard stood to one side, watchful and silent. Jon inhaled slowly as he looked at the Iron Throne itself, still looming in the background. He had little taste for presiding from that seat of twisted steel and melted swords. But there were times when symbolism mattered. If the realm was to see that he did not tolerate brigands who dared appropriate his authority, he needed to be the visible source of justice. Tyrion, standing at his side, caught his eye and gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Your Grace," Tyrion murmured under his breath. "Ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Jon replied in the same hushed tone. The tall doors groaned as they swung open, letting in a beam of wintry light and a rush of outside air. Gendry Baratheon entered first, dressed more formally than usual, a dark blue surcoat emblazoned with the black stag. Behind him, half a dozen of his Stormland guards escorted the prisoners. 8 men all in manacles, their faces smeared with grime from the road. Their clothing bore ragged remnants of what might have once been Lannister or Baratheon uniforms, though it was impossible to say for certain. They trudged across the throne room, heads lowered, boots echoing on the stone. A hush settled over those present, broken only by the faint shuffling of feet. Jon ascended the narrow steps of the Iron Throne, the metal forging a faint chill beneath his gloves. He wore black, as always, with the Stark wolf and Targaryen dragon conjoined in the subtle embroidery at his collar, a symbolic attempt to unite his 2 lineages. Tyrion took his place just below the throne, at Jon's right hand. Gendry halted before them and bowed. The king acknowledged him with a short nod, then let his gaze flick to the prisoners. Gendry's voice was steady, though it reverberated through the grand hall. "Your Grace, I present these men who have violated the peace of the realm, traveling under your banner without leave. They harassed, robbed, and harmed honest folk on the roads of the Stormlands, claiming to hold royal authority. I apprehended them near Stonehelm, where they had taken refuge in an abandoned tower. Memsor, the leader of the brigands, a wiry fellow with a patchy beard and an old scar across one cheek, lifted his head to speak. He had eyes that darted like a feral animal's. We served the crown once," he spat, "but when the gold ran out, the war ended and we were left to rot." One of Gendry's guards cuffed him sharply, ordering silence. Jon gestured for calm. "We do not punish men for being cast aside," Jon said, his voice resounding with quiet authority. "We punish them for dishonoring themselves and harming others. You carried out raids under my name, yes?" A short hesitation followed. The scarred man exhaled, as if bracing himself. "We needed to eat. The folk in those villages had plenty. Why should we starve when we fought for the crown once? We wore your colors so they wouldn't fight back. That's all. We didn't kill no one who didn't deserve it." A hush spread, and tension rippled through the watchers. Tyrion's gaze flickered briefly to Jon, waiting to see if the king would respond. But Jon only watched the man, the same steady intensity in his dark eyes. "You laid claim to authority that was not yours. You stole under the pretense of royal orders. The crown does not forgive such crimes lightly, especially now when the realm struggles to rebuild." Jon kept his tone level, though the weight of passing judgment pressed on him. He glanced at Gendry, who gave a fractional nod in support. "Have any of you more to say in your defense?" The others remained silent. Some stared at their feet, while 1 or 2 cast furtive looks around the throne room as though seeking a mercy they knew would not come. Finally, Jon drew in a breath. You stand accused of treason against the crown and crimes against innocent small folk. Do you deny it? Mutters of protest or acceptance passed among the prisoners. Most only shook their heads. Jon's expression settled into grave resolve. Then here is my judgment. For crimes under the banner of the crown, the penalty is death. Yet, we are not in the midst of war. And this is the season of rebuilding, of new beginnings. If you truly fought for the realm before deserting, I offer you a choice. Emperor. Tyrion's eyebrows lifted slightly, as though curious. The prisoners looked up, anxiety flickering across their faces. Take the black, Jon said, and a faint ripple of recognition stirred the crowd. Renounce whatever allegiances you once held. Join the Night's Watch, guard the realm upon the wall, and live out your days in service, provided you abide by the laws of the Watch. Or face the sentence you have earned, death before the city. The choice is yours. Lannister. A hush followed, broken by the ragged breathing of the 8 men. The Night's Watch. The words hung heavy with old significance, though the threat of White Walkers had dissolved. Even so, the ancient brotherhood still stood in place. Jon had helped rebuild it in the aftermath, believing the realm always needed watchers in the far north, if only to preserve the tradition and guard against dangers yet unknown. The scarred man swallowed hard. He glanced at his companions, some of whom nodded, others looking wary. Then he bowed his head. We'll take the black, your grace. We've had enough of war, but if it's that or death, we'll swear the vows. Nar. Tyrion, listening carefully, gave the king a sidewise glance. Jon's offer was merciful, reminiscent of Ned Stark's old ways. Even after all this time, Ned's lessons lived on in Jon. Tyrion could sense how the crowd received it. A mixture of relief and respect for the king's willingness to give men a second chance if they were willing to serve. Jon gestured for the gold cloaks to step forward. Then you shall be taken into custody until arrangements are made for your journey north. The Night's Watch awaits, if you keep your word. If you betray it, your life is forfeit. Then to you. The men were led away, shackles rattling. A murmur passed through the watchers, some nodding approval, others exchanging uncertain looks. There would always be those who believed brigands deserved a quick execution. Tyrion took a step forward, preparing to dismiss the court. But Jon spoke again, his voice carrying. Let this serve as a warning to all who might misuse the king's authority. We will not tolerate such deeds. Whether you are a high-born lord or a common soldier, justice will find you. Then thrust. With those words, Jon rose from the Iron Throne and descended. The throne room's tension eased. There was a slight scattering of applause, subdued yet genuine, from a handful of folk who had drifted in to witness the proceedings. Others bowed respectfully as Jon and Tyrion departed through a side corridor, Gendry behind them. They reached a smaller antechamber, far from prying ears. Gendry exhaled, removing his leather gloves. That was kindly done, Jon. Most kings would have had them executed on the spot. My own father would likely have strung them up without a thought. Nina won. Jon studied his old friend's face. I'm not sure how Robert Baratheon would have judged them, but I do know that more blood doesn't always solve anything. The Watch can use men who still have fight in them, even if they're reformed criminals. They'll be useful as long as they keep their vows. Gendry nodded. His expression carried lingering admiration. The Stormlands remain loyal. The lords will appreciate seeing that you keep a fair hand in matters of the realm. I'll let them know how the trial ended. Neda. And how fare the Stormlands? Tyrion asked, stepping up with the easy posture of one who thrived in conversation. We haven't heard much since your riders left for these deserters. We still have bandit problems in the outer reaches, Gendry said, tucking his gloves into his belt. Not as organized as these men, but small pockets of outlaws. Some farmland remains abandoned. Crops burned during the war were never replaced. I've tried to send laborers to replant, but it's slow. Still, we'll manage. Tyrion glanced at Jon, then back to Gendry. If there's anything you need to facilitate that process, grain or additional funds, notify us. We'll see what can be done from the royal granaries. Gendry's mouth curved into a dry smile. Thank you, my Lord Hand. I won't overburden the treasury, but I appreciate the offer. The Stormlands won't forget it." They spoke a while longer about roads and supply lines, the kind of conversation that once might have bored Gendry to tears, back when he was a blacksmith's apprentice. Yet now he took to it with a quiet determination, well aware that the prosperity of his domain depended on these tedious details. Jon found himself relieved that Gendry had proven so capable. The old feuds and lust for war might have shaped the Stormlands in another era, but now Gendry's leadership offered a calmer perspective. Eventually, they parted ways, with Gendry departing to oversee the men he had brought. Jon and Tyrion found themselves alone in the corridor, the air still carrying the faint taste of damp stone. Tyrion let out a short sigh. "Sometimes I can't help thinking," he began, "that the realm is perched on the edge of a knife. One misstep, one rash choice, and old resentments flare up like wildfire." "You did well today." Jon gave a subdued nod. "I hope so. I only know that more corpses won't bring us the peace we need." Tyrion's expression softened. "I recall a time when you were known for being the biggest fool in Westeros for your honor. Seems you haven't changed so much." Jon almost smiled. "Honor is something I learned from my father, though we've seen how tricky it can be in a place like King's Landing." Nah. They walked on, the corridor leading them past tall, arched windows where sunlight penetrated through the leftover drizzle. Servants bowed as they passed, mindful not to speak unless spoken to. The hush allowed Tyrion and Jon to continue their conversation in a more private tone. After a time, Tyrion cleared his throat. "I've had word from the Master of Coin. The royal coffers are inching towards stability, but we're still short if we plan to repair the entire city's harbor. The damages from the war were extensive. We might need another loan from Braavos, or some alternative arrangement." Then Jon made a quiet sound of acknowledgement. "The city does need functioning harbors. We can't trade if ships keep running aground on broken piers or half-sunken debris. Let's see if we can find some middle ground. I'd prefer not to drown the crown in further debt." Tyrion touched the pin on his collar that marked him as hand. "I'll begin negotiations with the Iron Bank. We won't promise them the shirts off our backs, but we might pledge a small percentage of future tariff revenue." Nenzims. They stepped outside onto a curtained balcony that overlooked the keep's inner courtyard. Jon rested his hands on the railing, gaze drifting over the rows of training dummies, the stables, the patchy garden newly replanted with winter roses. The sense of wet earth rose, mingling with the faint odor of horse. In the courtyard below, a training session was underway. Gold cloaks practicing drills, wooden swords thwacking in rhythmic unison. "I still find it strange," Jon said softly, "to be here in a place that once felt hostile to my family, ruling as king." Tyrion joined him at the balustrade, short arms just reaching the ledge. "It must be. I imagine Ned Stark once stood in these halls as a stranger among vipers. But times change, and so do fortunes. You are here by right of blood and by a war's end. Perhaps you can cleanse the city of some of its old shadows." Jon thought of Ned, of how he had been named hand to Robert Baratheon, and how disastrously that had ended. The memory weighed on him more than he cared to admit. And yet here he stood, with the son of the man Ned had once distrusted above all. Tywin Lannister's cunning child, an outcast even among his own kin. They were an unlikely pair, but the Seven Kingdoms had been shaped by stranger alliances. They parted ways then. Tyrion headed to the council chambers for an afternoon session with various advisors. Jon returned to his solar, where Raven scrolls awaited his attention. Messages from the north, from the Vale, from across the sea. Each scroll weighed differently on his mind, a fresh reminder that a king's duties were endless. One letter bore Sansa's seal. Jon broke the wax with a knife, unrolling the parchment. Her writing was neat, each word carefully chosen. Dawn. The north remained secure. The harvest near the neck was better than we expected, though winter lingers in the high passes. Lady Brienne's presence at Winterfell reassures the lords, and I have begun repairs on the keeps that were burned during the wars. There is another matter I wish to discuss, regarding rumors of an alliance proposed by the Vale. It seems Lord Robert Arryn's advisors are keen on reinforcing ties with the north through marriage. I have yet to give them an answer, but I sense they press for a formal bond. I would value your counsel on how we might best respond without jeopardizing the North's autonomy. Yours, Sansa. Jon's heart clenched. He could almost hear her quiet, measured tone, the caution behind every syllable. Alliances by marriage were a currency in Westeros. He had learned that painfully over the years. If the Vale wanted to align themselves more closely with the Starks, was that a threat or an opportunity? Sansa would know best how to navigate those waters, yet she wanted his perspective. He set the letter aside, determined to address it once he had time to think. Another raven came from the Citadel in Old Town. A polite request for more funding to help rebuild certain halls that had been damaged by the influx of refugees during the war. Then he scanned letters from lesser lords, seeking the king's favor or complaining of a boundary dispute. The swirl of it all made his head ache, yet he pressed on, well aware that this was the cost of ruling. When the afternoon light began to slant more golden, Jon emerged from his solar, letting a steward gather the letters that needed replies. On his way to the council chamber, he passed through a lesser-used corridor and encountered Sir Davos Seaworth. Davos had remained in King's Landing at Jon's request, serving as a voice of practical sense on the small council. He wore the pin that marked him as master of ships, though for now, the Royal Navy was more of a skeleton fleet still in repair. "Your Grace," Davos greeted, inclining his head in that modest way of his. "I was looking for you. I've just been down at the harbor to see the Braavosi vessels. Repairs are coming along, but the workers are short on supplies. More lumber is needed." "Monimipo." Jon nodded, slowing his steps. "We can allocate some from the Crownlands, but not too much. Local villages need wood for their own homes." "Aye," Davos said, rubbing the stubble on his chin. "We might look further up the Blackwater for timber that's less in demand. Maybe strike a deal with the Riverlords for a fair price. Speak to Tyrion. Coordinate with the Master of Coin." Jon gave him a faint, grateful smile. "And thank you for tending to the harbor. I know it's a monumental task." Sir Davos shook his head softly. "We faced worse, Your Grace. Rebuilding is easier than burying the dead, at least." That statement weighed between them like a shared memory of the war's horrors. Davos stepped away, continuing toward the council chambers while Jon took a moment to gather his composure. He recalled the brutal nights beyond the wall, the stench of dragonfire in King's Landing, the unstoppable marching of the dead. Compared to all that, overseeing shipments of lumber seemed almost trivial. Yet it was the realm's survival in peacetime that mattered now. He found Tyrion seated at the council table, accompanied by several members of the king's advisors, a master of whispers newly appointed, an unassuming man named Rhaenel, who had served as a scribe for Varys long ago, and a master of laws, Lady Tandorosby, who was still adapting to her role. They were in the midst of discussing a new set of decrees to regulate taxes on traveling merchants. Papers cluttered the table, along with an old map of the Crownlands, marked with colored inks to show supply routes. Jon eased into his seat at the head of the table, meeting Tyrion's inquisitive glance. "Has anything new come up?" The Master of Whispers answered in a soft voice that belied the sharpness of his gaze. "My little birds bring word of discontent among certain lords in the Westerlands. They're grumbling that House Lannister's influence has been diminished, and they blame Lord Tyrion for it." Tyrion breathed out, an edge of old bitterness in his expression. "They never truly saw me as a rightful scion of House Lannister anyway. Is this discontent likely to grow into open rebellion?" Rhaenel shrugged. "Not with your nephew, Lord Tyrion, or your cousin. There are few legitimate Lannisters left to champion a cause. Most of these lords simply mutter that the crown is ignoring their needs. I believe it's more a question of resources. They want the king's attention, likely a new influx of coin or reduced taxes on their exports." Jon drummed his fingers lightly on the tabletop. "We'll need to address it before it becomes a bigger problem. Send a royal envoy to speak with them, perhaps someone from the Westerlands who has their respect." "Nas." Tyrion's mouth twisted in thought. "I can think of 2 or 3 minor knights they might listen to, but the real trouble is that many of these lords are used to Tywin's iron rule. They thrived under a system of intimidation. Now we offer them compromise instead of fear." Some see that as weakness. Jon nodded slowly, acknowledging the complexity. We'll show them a different sort of strength. One that can provide stability without brutality. The Master of Laws, Lady Rosby, cleared her throat. If I may suggest, Your Grace, it could be wise to lower certain levies on the Westerlands temporarily, so they can recover from war damages. We've done this for the Riverlands and parts of the Crownlands already. They'll expect the same consideration. Tyrion rubbed his chin. Financially possible, though it will reduce the short-term revenue. We can offset it if the Iron Bank backs our next shipping venture. Jon glanced between them. Fine. Draft the decree. We'll announce it once we finalize the trade negotiations with Bravos. Let's avoid making promises we can't keep. The meeting pressed on, delving into the intricacies of border disputes, knightly appointments, and a recent scandal involving a minor lord who had tried to bribe a city watch captain. Through it all, Tyrion orchestrated the conversation with deft skill. He pointed out potential pitfalls and deflected any attempts to stall progress. Jon listened and weighed each argument. Now and again, he shared his own perspective, which often veered toward the practical. Did this serve the people? Was this just or merely convenient? When at last they concluded, the shadows had lengthened across the chamber, the day sliding toward dusk. Rhaenell slipped away with a quiet bow, Lady Rosby gathering her papers. Tyrion remained, leaning back in his chair, a hint of fatigue in his eyes. Jon exhaled, pressing a hand to the back of his neck. I'll never complain about a day at the wall again, he muttered wryly. At least up there I knew my enemies by sight. Tyrion rubbed his temples. Politics is a battlefield with invisible lines. You've done well so far, Jon. Don't let it wear you down. A servant brought them fresh cups of water, and Tyrion downed his in one long swallow. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, considering the king with a quiet intensity. I've been thinking, Tyrion said, about something Daenerys once tried. She believed in awarding positions to people based on merit, rather than birth. She attempted to break certain cycles of nobility. Perhaps we should consider something akin to that with minor offices in the Crownlands or elsewhere. Let skilled commoners prove themselves worthy. It could help unify the realm. Jon studied him. The mention of Daenerys was always delicate, but there was no avoiding her influence. It's a risk, Jon said. The nobility won't take kindly to seeing their privileges eroded, but you may be right. We need the realm to see that we value ability and loyalty over blood alone. Tyrion spread his hands. We can start small. Appoint a few stewards or accountants who come from less exalted backgrounds. Show results. Once the lords see that those officials are efficient, they'll have less room to complain. Jon couldn't help but recall how Samwell Tarly had once spoken about reforms needed in the Citadel. How knowledge should be shared rather than hoarded. Perhaps this was a piece of that same vision. Draft a proposal, Jon said at last. We'll discuss it with the council next week. A measured approach. Tyrion nodded, satisfied. I will. They left the council chamber together, stepping into a corridor lit by torches that flared and flickered against the stone walls. A swirl of bustle greeted them. Courtiers, scribes, guards passing in pairs. Some paused to bow. Others merely pressed themselves against the walls to let the king and his hand pass. Shall we dine in the smaller hall tonight? Tyrion asked. I've heard rumors that the cooks managed to get fresh pheasant. Jon rubbed his forehead, feeling a dull ache there. I'll dine, but I'll need to speak with Sansa soon. By Raven at least. She wants counsel about the Vale's push for marriage alliances. Ah, Tyrion said, pursing his lips. The Vale always had a unique leadership structure, with that boy lord so easily swayed. Perhaps they wish to tie themselves to the north for security. A wise move in some respects, but it might cause friction if they demand too many concessions. Still, Sansa is cunning enough to navigate it. Jon nodded, though he felt the weight of it. Everything was a negotiation. Even his sister's future, or the future of those she might marry off to keep alliances stable. It made him yearn for simpler days, though he knew those days were gone for good. They reached the smaller hall, a modest dining chamber near the kitchens that they often used for private meals. A handful of attendants quickly set out platters of roast pheasant, boiled turnips, and fresh bread. Tyrion poured himself a cup of wine while Jon opted for water again. When they had settled at the table, conversation fell into a companionable lull for a few minutes. Cutlery clinked softly. Jon eventually spoke, voice low. "We've managed to maintain peace for these past months. But I can't shake the feeling that something lurks beyond our sight. The realm has too many old grudges, too many hidden knives." Lannister. Tyrion regarded him calmly. "That's not paranoia, unfortunately. It's realism. Our job is to ensure that when one of those knives does emerge, we're prepared. We have to keep the people's trust, so that any conspiracies find no easy foothold." Jon grunted in agreement, breaking off a piece of bread and chewing it slowly. "Any word from the Iron Islands?" Tyrion shook his head. "Only that Yara Greyjoy continues to rule with a stern hand. She's not defiant of your rule exactly, but she insists on a certain independence. As of now, there's been no open conflict." "Dem. And Dorne?" Tyrion sipped his wine. "Dorne is quiet under the new regent. They have no appetite for further war from what we can tell. But quiet can hide many ambitions. At least for now, they seem content to recover from the devastation left behind by the Lannisters and by Cersei's fiasco." Jon let the quiet stretch again, focusing on the meal. Each bite tasted of routine, though he was grateful for the nourishment. After a time, he set his fork down and glanced at Tyrion. "You're handling all this well. Too well. Sometimes. You've been hand before, but this can't be easy for you." "Then?" Tyrion paused, wine cup halfway to his lips. He lowered it gently. "It's not," he said in a subdued tone. "I recall the mistakes I made when I served Daenerys. The illusions I clung to. This time, I'm determined not to let idealism blind me. But I do believe in what we're doing, Jon. That helps keep me going." Jon's gaze flickered with a faint spark of empathy. "We can't change the past, but we can shape the future if we're careful." "I'm glad you're by my side, Tyrion." A shadow of a smile touched Tyrion's face. "I appreciate that. I've never quite been needed before. Not truly. Feared, perhaps. Used, certainly. But rarely needed in the way you mean. So let's keep forging forward, one day at a time." "Then I know." The meal ended quietly, and Tyrion excused himself to finalize some letters that needed to be sent to the Westerlands by Raven at first light. Jon returned to his chambers, where he took a seat at the heavy wooden desk near the hearth. The warmth of the fire on his back contrasted with the chill that seemed to linger in the night air. He unrolled a new piece of parchment, dipped a quill in ink, and began to draft a reply to Sansa. "Sansa, I trust your wisdom regarding the Vale's proposed alliance. In these times, forging strong bonds is important, but we must not give away our autonomy lightly. If their advisors demand a marriage that places the North at a disadvantage, refuse them or negotiate terms that favor both sides. Our priority must be the security of the North, as well as the stability of the realm. The Vale relies on our friendship. We do not rely on theirs. If they wish for marriage, let them prove the sincerity of their commitment by offering something of equal worth, a promise of shared garrisons, or a portion of their harvest. Show them we are not desperate. I'm proud of the leadership you've shown. The realm is healing, and the North stands strong because of you. I hope to see you soon, though I know our duties keep us apart. Jon." He blew on the ink to dry it, then folded the parchment and pressed his seal into the wax. A quiet knock at the door startled him. He looked up as one of the king's stewards entered, bowing. "Forgive me, your grace. Lord Tyrion asked me to deliver this note." "Nevermind." He handed a small slip of paper to Jon, who took it and read the neat script. "Jon, we've received a raven from Braavos. They are sending an emissary who arrives in 3 days, ready to finalize negotiations for the loan to repair the harbor. I suggest we prepare a formal welcome. The Braavosi do appreciate a show of respect, even if we aim to keep ceremony modest." "Tyrion." Jon set the paper aside and thanked the steward. His mind drifted with new considerations. A welcome banquet, or at least a reception that would signal the crown's earnestness. Braavos was a key ally, and it was time to secure that alliance with care. The next morning dawned crisp and cold, with the clouds dispersed, leaving the sky a fragile blue. Jon rose early from an unsettled sleep, dressed, and headed to the courtyard. Sometimes, he liked to train with a sword or ride a horse at first light, reminding himself of simpler routines. Today, he found the courtyard mostly empty. A few gold cloaks patrolled the walls, while a stableboy dragged a rake across the muddy ground. Unsheathing Longclaw, Jon tested the weight in his hand. The Valyrian steel caught the morning sun, the wolf's head pommel seeming to glint. Memories cascaded through him, from the gift Lord Commander Mormont had bestowed to the battles he had fought. The sword felt like an extension of his arm. Sometimes, he thought it was the only thing that truly belonged to him, beyond rank or station. He moved through a series of drills, blade whirling in graceful arcs, feet pivoting on the damp stones. His breath misted in the chilly air. Each strike or parry carried an echo of old lessons from Castle Black, or from Sir Roderick Castle in Winterfell's yard. He was so focused that he didn't notice Tyrion approaching until the dwarf cleared his throat. Jon lowered the sword, turning. Tyrion was wrapped in a heavy cloak, hands tucked into the sleeves. "I see you're busy giving the shadows quite the thrashing," Tyrion remarked dryly. Jon managed a small grin, slipping Longclaw back into its scabbard. "It helps me think. Sometimes it's easier to swing a sword at a ghost than to fight unseen foes in council." Tyrion nodded, stepping forward carefully to avoid the worst of the mud. "I won't keep you long. I just wanted to speak with you about a certain letter I received. A rumor from one of my more discreet correspondents in the Vale. It seems there may be some who wish to push for the Vale's independence unless they're granted significant concessions in your realm." "There were," Jon sighed, recalling Sansa's letter. "So they're playing all sides. A threat if we don't agree to the marriage alliance, or something along those lines. That's the suggestion. I doubt they'll break from the crown so openly, given the Vale's limited strength without strong allies. But still, it's a maneuver." Jon set his jaw. "I'll send a clearer message. If the Vale tries to secede, they'll find no support from the rest of the realm. If they want to remain part of these 7 kingdoms, they can do so by forging alliances built on trust, not coercion. Sansa will handle them, no doubt." Tyrion exhaled, the morning chill turning his breath to wisps. "I don't doubt it either. Still, I thought you should know. We'll keep an eye on developments." They strolled across the courtyard, the wet ground squelching underfoot. Jon found himself unexpectedly grateful for Tyrion's presence. It was calming to have someone with no illusions about power, someone who had grown up in the heart of it and understood its double-edged nature. Tyrion might have been the quintessential courtier once, but he had the scars to prove that no one emerged from such a life unscathed. A distant horn call sounded from the direction of the city gates. Jon turned his head, listening to the echo bounce off the stony walls. Perhaps new visitors had arrived, or a shipment of supplies. Each day carried a litany of small events that might, cumulatively, shape the future. "Will you be attending to the trial of that bribery case this afternoon?" Tyrion asked as they walked. Jon grimaced. "Yes, another minor lord who thinks he can buy loyalty. Our laws must be upheld or we'll end up with corruption at every level." Tyrion offered a wry shrug. "Corruption is as common in King's Landing as fleas on a stray dog, but we can reduce it if we stay vigilant. I'll stand with you. I'm curious to see how we handle this new brand of justice without letting the man's title protect him." Ninian. So the day rolled on. They presided over a hearing in the throne room, where the accused lord wore a tense smile and tried to charm his way out of trouble. Jon's questions cut through the charm, revealing that the man had bribed the city watch to overlook a shipment of contraband. Despite the court's murmurs, Jon sentenced him to a heavy fine and temporary loss of titles. A far cry from the days when the highborn could buy their way out of any punishment. The lord left in a rage, but the onlookers seemed pleased that justice was not for sale. Tyrion, watching from the side, felt a pang of satisfaction that the new reign dared hold nobles accountable. It was a small step perhaps, but each step mattered. The next morning, news arrived that the Braavosi emissary was already in sight of the harbor. arriving a day earlier than expected. A stir of activity rushed through the keep. Servants lit additional lanterns, prepared fresh rushes for the floors, and made sure that the somewhat modest state hall was presentable. Tyrion hurried to finalize the welcoming details, while Jon dressed in formal attire. Word spread that the emissary traveled with a retinue of Braavosi guards, each clad in slender steel and colored sashes, a reflection of their wealthy city. When they were finally ushered into the Red Keep's smaller state hall, Jon and Tyrion greeted them courteously. The emissary was a tall woman with silver-streaked hair, introducing herself as Serena Thaharo. Her sharp eyes swept the chamber, taking in the subdued decorations with a faint, inscrutable smile. Tyrion led the conversation, praising Braavos' role in supporting trade and reaffirming the crown's intention to repay any debts. The emissary listened carefully, occasionally nodding. When Jon spoke, he focused on the realm's needs: harbor reconstruction, stable shipping routes, and his desire for a fair deal that would benefit both sides. Serena asked pointed questions about collateral, timetables, and potential interest rates. Tyrion answered with practiced smoothness, drawing on his experience as master of coin years ago. The negotiations lasted well past midday, with scribes hurrying to and fro with fresh parchment. At intervals, they broke to allow everyone a chance to eat or confer in private. Jon and Tyrion retreated to a side room, where they spoke in low voices about the Braavosi demands. They wanted guaranteed trade privileges at King's Landing and Lannisport, with reduced tariffs for Braavosi ships. In return, they would lend a substantial sum to rebuild the harbor infrastructure. They're pushing for a high interest rate, Tyrion noted, scanning the latest set of figures scratched onto a wax tablet. We could haggle them down a bit, but we risk losing the loan altogether if we push too hard. Jon frowned. Are there any alternatives to a Braavosi loan? Pentos, perhaps? Or Tyrosh? Tyrion shook his head. Those city-states are less reliable. The Iron Bank of Braavos is the most consistent partner. If we want the funds quickly, this is our best option, but it will place us in debt for years to come. Jon considered. So we balance the short-term need for rebuilding against the long-term burden. If we do nothing, the harbor remains half-ruined, and trade suffers. That means less revenue to rebuild the rest of the realm. It's a vicious cycle. Benorsi. Tyrion gave a mirthless smile. Indeed. I'd suggest we secure the loan but negotiate better terms. Perhaps we offer them an exclusive right to operate a small counting house near the docks, and in return, they reduce the interest. Braavos loves having a foothold in foreign lands. Jon nodded, pressing his lips together. Let's try. We mustn't appear desperate. They need our future business as much as we need their gold. Dunham. They returned to the negotiation table, where Serena Thaharo waited, a poised figure in her long midnight blue robes. Her guards stood behind her, silent. The rhythmic murmur of voices filled the chamber for hours more, as each side proposed, countered, and re-proposed terms. There was a moment when the Braavosi threatened to withdraw altogether if their demands were not met. Tyrion skillfully reminded them of the Iron Bank's historical preference for stable governments that repaid their debts. Jon underlined that he intended to unify Westeros for the long haul, a lucrative prospect for Braavos. In the end, they reached a compromise. The interest rate was lowered slightly, but Braavos gained the right to establish a small counting house in King's Landing, plus assurances that Braavosi ships would receive docking priority for specified months of the year. The final documents were drafted in triplicate, sealed, and signed. Serena Thaharo shook hands with Jon and Tyrion, her expression guarded but content. We look forward to many profitable years with your reign, King Jon, she said, bowing with a courtly flourish. May your rule stand firm. As her retinue departed to rooms prepared for them in the keep, Tyrion let out a weary sigh. Well, it's done. We have our loan. Jon looked relieved yet wary. And a new set of obligations. Let's hope it pays off. Tyrion patted Jon's arm. We'll make it pay off. We've come this far, haven't we? They stepped into the corridor, away from the throng of onlookers. Lamps flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The hour was late. Jon caught himself thinking again of the burdens that came with each agreement. His father, Ned Stark, had always cautioned that every promise exacts a price. Was this arrangement wise, or would it come back to haunt them if the Iron Bank grew too powerful in the city? Still, necessity guided them. They had no other quick means of restoring the docks. At least the negotiated terms were not as crushing as they might have been. When the next day dawned, the city's mood seemed somehow lighter. News spread that the Crown had secured funds for harbor repairs. Merchants murmured their approval. Ship captains looked forward to safer berths. Even the small folk who scratched out a living by loading and unloading crates at the wharfs felt a spark of optimism. Perhaps these new rulers truly would rebuild rather than break. Jon found a moment to ride out beyond the city walls, accompanied by a small guard of gold cloaks. He needed to clear his head in the open air. The fields beyond King's Landing were still torn in places, dotted with half-repaired farmhouses and blackened patches where wildfire had once burned. But patches of green rose stubbornly from the dirt, a sign of spring to come. Jon guided his horse along a gentle slope, feeling the breeze on his face. In the distance, he spotted children chasing one another near a humble hut, their laughter faint but distinct. Life went on. He thought of the north, of Sansa, of Arya somewhere far beyond these lands, of the wind-swept hills outside Winterfell. He thought of the Night's Watch, newly strengthened by a few more recruits. He recalled the White Wolf, ghost, roaming the wilderness near Castle Black. And he thought of Tyrion, poring over ledgers with a dogged focus that came, no doubt, from his father's legacy. Together, they had managed to keep the realm from tipping back into chaos. Upon returning to the Red Keep, Jon rode through the muddy streets, noticing how some homes had fresh wood shutters and shops had new signs. Rebuilding was slow, but it was real. He dismounted in the courtyard, handing the reins to a stable boy. As he climbed the steps into the keep, he passed Tyrion, who was speaking to a pair of Braavosi envoys near the gate. Tyrion caught Jon's eye and gave a slight salute with 2 fingers, as if to say all was well. Jon made his way up the winding stairs toward the private chambers. Servants bowed or curtsied as he passed. He climbed until he reached a narrow hallway that led to a small balcony facing the sea. The view from here stretched over the rooftops, down to the harbor, where ships' masts swayed in the wind. He stopped at the balustrade, resting his palms on the warm stone. Late afternoon sunlight gilded the waves, and in that shimmer, Jon allowed himself a moment to imagine a better future. One where children would not starve because of war, where entire families would not be uprooted. He stayed there for some time, silent. When Tyrion's footsteps eventually echoed behind him, Jon remained with his back turned, gazing outward. Tyrion stepped up alongside him, breathing a little harder from the climb. "Beautiful view," Tyrion said, squinting at the horizon. "Makes one almost forget the trouble we faced not long ago." Jon glanced at him. "It's easier to forget when the city isn't burning." Tyrion's expression sobered, and he gave a brief nod. "Yes, indeed, we've come a long way." They stood there together, the king in his hand, the hush of the wind mingling with the distant clamor of the city. The gulls circled overhead, calling out like watchful spirits. "You think we'll manage to hold things together?" Jon asked quietly. Tyrion's eyes flicked to him, then back to the water. "I do. You have something few rulers ever grasp. The will to do what's right rather than what's merely advantageous. And you've allowed me to help you navigate the complexities. We'll make mistakes, certainly. We may even fail in some areas. But I believe we'll succeed in the most important task, giving the realm a chance to heal." "That is on our." Jon let those words settle. The old anxieties remained, a gnawing reminder that no peace lasted forever in Westeros. But he also felt a swell of resolve, as tangible as the sun on his face. He would continue to do his duty, to guide this fragile kingdom away from bloodshed. And Tyrion would be there, cynical, shrewd, and fiercely dedicated. Together, they had defied the odds once. It would not be simple. Nothing about sitting the Iron Throne was simple. But day after day, they would work, forging alliances, punishing wrongdoing, offering mercy when they could. If the rest of the world doubted them, so be it. Their actions would speak louder than oaths or banners. Jon turned back toward the keep at last, pushing away from the railing. Tyrion matched his pace as they walked into the corridor. The evening shadows had begun to stretch, painting the walls with dusky light. Somewhere below, a hush of activity signaled the dinner preparations, the change of the guard, the next wave of nighttime tasks. And above it all, the Red Keep stood, battered by history, yet still standing. They descended the steps side by side, their footsteps echoing in unison. Even in the dim corridors, there was a sense of forward motion, a slow but unyielding march toward what lay ahead. Down the long halls they went, each lost in thought, each certain, despite doubts and nightmares, that they were creating something new, something that might endure. And though the burdens might only grow heavier, the two of them carried it together. The reluctant king who had never sought a crown, and the dwarf who had outlived everyone's expectations, forging a partnership that no one could have foreseen. In the stillness of that evening, neither man spoke of the future's uncertainties. They merely continued onward, ready for the next sunrise and whatever challenges it would bring, determined to protect a realm that so desperately needed their combined strength. Aki and Enman. The days that followed were subdued, neither wholly tense nor fully at ease, as though the city hovered between two breaths. Harbor repairs began in earnest, financed by the freshly inked deal with the Iron Bank. The rhythmic pound of hammers echoed across the waterfront at dawn, and workers hauled lumber from newly built ramps that jutted into the shallows. From a distance, one could see clusters of scaffolding like skeletal arms around the old piers, which had stood half-collapsed since the war. Each morning, reports of progress arrived in the Red Keep. A new section of dock reinforced, a hazard dredged from the harbor floor, another partial slip made ready for fishing boats. Jon quickly grew used to these updates, as part of his daily routine. He would read them first thing alongside Tyrion in the small council room, the both of them sipping weak ale or water while the rest of the council trickled in. The harbor was but one concern. Trade caravans from the Westerlands, and the Reach needed protection on the roads, especially as rumors of bandit attacks persisted in remote areas. The Vale continued to press for an official response about the potential marriage alliance, and a newly arrived envoy from Dorne had just petitioned the crown to address lingering border disputes with House Tyrell's forces in the Dornish marches. All of it coalesced into a swirl of administrative burdens that threatened to devour every waking hour. Tyrion was in his element, juggling negotiations, writing letters, inviting minor lords to the Red Keep for private discussions. He did it all with a calm efficiency that betrayed neither fatigue nor frustration. At night, the lines beneath his eyes told a different story, yet no one could deny he served the king with loyalty and keen intellect. Jon suspected Tyrion harbored regrets for the years he had spent following Daenerys, but those regrets were turned now into tireless dedication. Each time Tyrion devised a cunning arrangement or spotted a hidden trap in a contract, Jon felt the realm's burdens lift just enough for him to breathe. Many an evening, Tyrion would find Jon in the library or the smaller solar, scanning old records or sifting through letters. There, they would map out the next day's priorities: a meeting with the master of ships, an inspection of the city-watched barracks, or a conversation with a visiting lord. Often the hours would slip away until the candles burned low. More than once, Jon woke from an uneasy doze to discover Tyrion had quietly left in the middle of the night. The hand's seat was frequently empty by first light, which meant Tyrion was already off somewhere, conferring with stewards or verifying the treasury's accounts. Word spread that the king's hand was relentless in his tasks. In taverns and markets, the small folk whispered that Tyrion Lannister was making amends for old sins, and that the king, with his somber ways and unwavering devotion, had found a partner whose cunning served the throne rather than corroded it. There were still skeptics, but gradually, more people came to accept that the old cycle of betrayal might not be repeating itself. On one rainy afternoon, Jon stood in the yard near the stables, waiting for a carriage to arrive from the Vale. The downpour hammered on the Red Keep's battlements. Servants rushed to and fro, hooded, their feet splashing in growing puddles. A handful of gold cloaks lined the archway that opened onto the sloping road below. Jon's cloak was soaked at the fringes, and droplets clung to the dark curls of his hair. He remained still, gazing through the veil of rain with narrowed eyes, aware of the swirling tension that came with the Vale's approach. Finally, a small procession emerged, horses picking their way carefully up the muddy incline. At the front rode a slender man in a cloak of emerald green, a falcon pin glinting on his breast. Behind him came 2 more riders and a carriage drawn by 4 horses. The falcon was the sigil of House Arryn, but these were the advisors who wielded real influence over young Lord Robert. Rumor suggested they had bigger ambitions than the child lord himself. Jon stepped forward as the procession entered the courtyard. The lead rider dismounted, his boots splashing in the muck. He bowed from the waist, carefully lowering his hood, revealing slicked back hair and a face that held a polite but thin smile. "Your Grace," he said, voice raised to be heard over the rain. "I am Albar Royce, envoy of the Vale. We have come at your invitation to discuss matters of alliance with the North, and any concerns His Grace may hold." Jon nodded, keeping his own voice steady. "Welcome, Lord Albar. We have quarters prepared for you. We can speak once you and your party have had a chance to rest." Albar straightened. "That is most gracious, Your Grace. We look forward to productive talks." Tyrion appeared at Jon's side then, offering a quick bow to Albar. "Lord Albar, I am Tyrion Lannister, Hand of the King. If you need anything, do let me know. I trust the ride was uneventful?" Albar inclined his head slightly, casting a critical eye on Tyrion. "The weather was the only challenge," he said, not unkindly, though there was an edge of guardedness in his voice. "We appreciate your hospitality." Jon gestured for a steward to guide them to the guest quarters. The horses snorted, hooves churning wet gravel as the party moved deeper into the courtyard. When Albar and his companions disappeared into the keep, Tyrion glanced at Jon through the steady drizzle. "I wonder," Tyrion murmured, "how these Vale men plan to negotiate. Are they truly here to strengthen ties, or to push some new form of leverage?" Jon let out a breath that almost turned to steam in the cool air. "We'll find out soon enough. I've already had a raven from Sansa, saying the Vale is all bluster, except for a few individuals she trusts. The rest are hungry for influence. They might think to force her hand through me." They returned indoors, leaving trails of water on the stones. Tyrion suggested that they allow Albar and his party the afternoon to settle, then meet them for a private audience in one of the smaller halls. Jon agreed. If the Vale wanted to posture, best to keep the meeting controlled, and without the pomp of the throne room. Tyrion nodded, turning away to send messages to the appropriate stewards and council members. By the time Albar Royce and his company appeared in that smaller hall, the storm had weakened to a gray drizzle tapping gently against the windows. A fire crackled in the hearth, illuminating the tapestry behind Jon's seat with dancing shadows. Tyrion stood at his right, hands clasped behind his back. A half-dozen of the Vale men settled themselves on a bench. Albar remained standing, presumably as a show of respect. Jon took note of each face. Sharp-boned, well-fed nobles whose names Sansa had mentioned in her letter. Advisors to Lord Robert, or in some cases lesser lords in their own right. Not all carried the Arryn falcon, though they wore various emblems that tied them to the Vale. Polite conversation began, a swirl of pleasantries about the journey, about the courtesy shown by the king. Jon allowed Tyrion to guide most of it, his voice measured and smooth. Eventually, Albar stepped forward. "Your Grace, as you may know, the Vale stands willing to formalize a strong alliance with the North by marriage. Lord Robert's advisors believe it would foster unity if the young lord were betrothed to a lady of House Stark." Jon listened in silence, recalling Sansa's clear position. The Vale's request was not entirely unwelcome, but it came with conditions that threatened northern autonomy. He himself had no desire to marry any Vale noble. He was well past such entanglements, and the suggestion of marrying Sansa to Robert Arryn was unthinkable for many reasons. He eyed Albar carefully. "My sister Sansa is Lady of the North," Jon said, voice calm. "If the Vale hopes for a union, it will be her decision. I do not arrange her marriages, and she is not a prize to be bartered." Albar's composure wavered slightly. One of the other Vale men, a barrel-chested knight wearing a silver brooch, cleared his throat. "Surely, your grace, the king's word carries influence over Lady Sansa. We merely hope to ensure that the bond between the North and the Vale remains steadfast. The mountain clans and other threats." Jon's face tightened. Tyrion interjected quietly. "The king does not treat his sister as a bargaining chip. If this is truly an offer of friendship, you may send your terms to Winterfell for Lady Sansa's consideration. Pressuring his grace here in King's Landing will not help your cause." A brief tension crackled in the room. Albar tried to salvage the moment. "We mean no offense. We only wish to suggest that the Vale and the North can benefit from a closer bond. We do hear troubling rumors of restlessness in the North, houses that might challenge Lady Sansa's hold if she lacks certain alliances." Jon stiffened. "Which houses?" Albar spread his hands apologetically. "Murmurs, my lord. Nothing concrete. But we reason that a marriage might quell any factions in the North by guaranteeing the support of the Vale." Jon recalled how swiftly the Northern lords had rallied around Sansa after the wars. They recognized her as Ned Stark's daughter, a Stark of Winterfell. She had proven herself their caretaker, ensuring food and shelter when winter bit deep. The notion that they would rebel against her seemed implausible, unless, of course, the Vale men themselves were sowing discontent. Tyrion's gaze narrowed. "I see," Jon said softly. "If this alliance is truly for mutual benefit, then perhaps you should make an official proposal. However, you will not use rumors to cajole me. The North is stable, and my sister is not without allies. She will weigh any proposal on its merits, not on threats." Albar inclined his head, a flash of impatience in his eyes. "As you will it, your grace." They spent another hour discussing lesser matters. Trade routes through the Bloody Gate, mutual defense pacts if bandits encroached on the Vale, and the possibility of sending skilled laborers north to assist with new fortifications. Throughout, Tyrion jotted notes on a piece of parchment. The Vale men spoke politely enough, but an undercurrent of tension ran beneath every word. They wanted something: marriage, or leverage, or both. When the meeting ended, Jon excused them with a nod. Albar bowed, promising to continue negotiations soon. As the door closed behind them, Jon ran a hand over his face, feeling the prickle of beard against his palm. Tyrion set down his quill. "They're testing you," Tyrion said, "hoping that you'll be swayed by vague threats. I suspect they want a formal arrangement that ensures the Vale can claim partial authority over the North if anything befalls Sansa." Jon let out a slow breath. "They won't get it. Sansa knows how to handle them, but I'll write to her again tonight. I'll warn her that they're overstepping in King's Landing. I don't like the suggestion that houses in the North might be stirring trouble. It sounds like they're planting seeds of discord to force her hand." "Then, Tyrion gave a grim little smile. "We have no shortage of opportunists. I doubt the Vale lords want open conflict, so they'll keep pushing with half-veiled threats and sweet promises until something gives. But at least they're not brandishing swords. We can keep them at bay for now." Jon nodded. "One more group to manage in this patchwork realm. Let's hope Sansa stands firm." They left the hall together, each lost in thought. Outside, the sun peeked through ragged clouds, making the wet flagstones glimmer. Jon found himself wishing for the crisp cold of Winterfell, where problems felt more direct. The onset of winter, the threat of a wildling raid. Down here, alliances were shrouded in insinuations and leveraged by half-lies. He knew it was necessary, but he couldn't help longing for simpler, more honest struggles. That night, Jon penned another raven to Sansa, detailing the Vale envoy's arrival and their attempts at pressure. He warned her of their claims that certain northern houses might resist her rule. He urged her to stay cautious, to keep close to loyal bannermen. When he sealed the letter, he felt a dull pang, wondering how many times he would have to write such warnings before the realm truly found peace. In the following week, the Vale's presence at court grew more noticeable. Albar Royce and his companions moved through the Red Keep's corridors, smiling at servants and courtiers, forging small connections. Tyrion's informants reported overhearing them at feasts, praising the king's generosity while quietly raising doubts about Sansa's ability to govern alone. Jon heard only fragments of these rumors, but he felt his temper simmer each time. He struggled to maintain composure, reminding himself that open anger would only feed their schemes. Tyrion, on the other hand, observed the Vale men with a clinical calm. He arranged private dinners, invited them to sample new wines from the arbor, introduced them to certain Crownlands lords who had no love for manipulative politics. In these subtle gatherings, Tyrion made it known that the crown's patience had limits. He never threatened outright, only hinted that if the Vale sought to undermine the king's sister, they might find themselves outside the protective mantle of the throne. Meanwhile, word arrived from Gendry Baratheon. A second wave of deserters had been caught in the Stormlands. This time, they did not pretend to wear the king's banner, but they terrorized remote villages. Gendry requested the crown's support in sending a contingent of men to track these outlaws through the thick forests near Nightsong. Jon granted it, seeing that cooperation strengthened Gendry's hold on the Stormlands and reminded the realm that the king did not ignore calls for help. Even amid these small crises, the city itself took on a cautious optimism. Braavosi engineers and local craftsmen collaborated at the docks. The skeleton of a new pier rose day by day, watched eagerly by sailors who longed for safer mooring. Street vendors found more customers now that some coin trickled back into circulation. The scars of war weren't gone, but the city's pulse steadied. At night, the taverns and brothels glowed with lantern light, welcoming a mixture of locals and travelers. The gold cloaks reported fewer violent crimes, though petty theft always flourished. Late one evening, after a lengthy day of council meetings, Jon walked the walls of the Red Keep with Grey Worm's replacement as head of the city watch, a forthright knight named Sir Alden. Grey Worm and the Unsullied had left Westeros soon after the war, so the city's defense now rested in the hands of men who had been reorganized under Jon's rule. Sir Alden was sober, disciplined, and not easily bribed, a rarity in King's Landing. He briefed the king on new watch protocols, patrol routes, and how the guards were ensuring the Vale visitors didn't slip into restricted areas unnoticed. Jon listened with care, approving of Sir Alden's thoroughness. As they finished the circuit, Jon paused to look out over the city's rooftops, a sea of dark tiles and flickering lights in the windows. The moon emerged behind drifting clouds, illuminating the spires. Jon felt a flicker of pride, cautious, but real. The city was healing under his watch, no small feat after all it had endured. When he returned to his chambers, he found Tyrion waiting. The dwarf sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, an empty wine goblet resting on the table beside him. He rose upon seeing Jon. "Apologies, Your Grace, but I thought you should know. Albar Royce has requested a private audience first thing in the morning. Something about an important matter regarding the Vale's future relations with the crown." Jon shrugged off his cloak. He never seems to tire of seeking audiences. Did he hint at what he wants this time? There. Tyrion grimaced. "Only that he has a new proposition that might benefit both parties. But he prefers to speak to you alone." Jon's eyes narrowed. "Alone? I want you present. He knows you're my hand." Tyrion lifted a brow. "Oh, I intend to be there. But he asked specifically that no other lords attend. He likely hopes to corner you into something without a large audience." Jon nodded. "We'll see what he has to say. Thank you, Tyrion. You've done enough for one night. Go rest." Tyrion offered a half smile. "Rest? I'm not sure I recall how that feels, but I'll try." He bowed slightly and departed, leaving Jon to the quiet hush of his chamber. Jon washed quickly and eased into bed, exhausted. Sleep came fitfully. The next morning arrived sooner than he would have liked, and the sunlight creeping through the window was pale and cold. He dressed in dark breeches and a loose black tunic, the Stark Targaryen sigil stitched in modest silver thread at the collar. Outside he could hear distant bells announcing an early gathering at the Sept, and the bustle of the castle kitchens preparing breakfast. In a small receiving room near the throne room, Tyrion waited with a bored expression. Servants had set out a carafe of hot spiced wine and 2 cups, anticipating the meeting. When Jon entered, Tyrion gestured to the unoccupied chairs. He should be here soon. A polite way to start the day. battling wits before breakfast. Jon allowed himself a small, wry twist of the lips. I'd rather face a White Walker than wade through another pointless conversation. But let's see what new scheme Albar's devised. They did not wait long. Albar arrived promptly, wearing a finely tailored doublet of emerald brocade, his hair carefully oiled back. He bowed deeply to Jon, then acknowledged Tyrion with a stiff nod. The door was closed behind them, leaving only a single guard stationed outside. Albar approached, clasping his hands in front of him. "Your Grace," he began in a measured tone. "I appreciate your time. I know you're busy tending to the needs of the realm. So I'll be direct. The Vale seeks a formal arrangement with House Stark, but we understand your sister's reluctance to commit to a marriage she doesn't desire. We propose an alternative, a wardship." "Nanamtuan." Jon's eyes narrowed warily. "Wardship?" Albar pressed on. "Yes. Should Lord Robert Arryn be named ward to Lady Sansa, or one of her trusted northern lords, it would place him in proximity to the north, strengthening ties without requiring an immediate betrothal. As a ward, he would learn from Lady Sansa's court, forging a bond of loyalty. Over time, if marriage becomes agreeable to both parties, so be it. If not, the alliance stands by virtue of the young." Jon glanced at Tyrion, noticing the hand's pursed lips. A wardship was a common practice among noble houses, often used to seal alliances or ensure loyalty. But it could also be a subtle means of control, as the ward's guardians gained enormous influence over the child lord's decisions. Why would Sansa or the North want that responsibility? Jon asked, voice level. Caring for a young lord from a different region can be burdensome. Albar's expression remained collected. Because it ensures that the Vale's armies stand ready to defend the North should any threat arise. Robert Arryn's presence in Winterfell would symbolize our commitment. In return, the Vale expects reciprocal support if any external force menaces our borders. Now, Jon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. He could see the logic, but also the trap. If Robert Arryn was placed under Sansa's guardianship, the Vale would keep a close eye on her decisions, and Robert's advisors might swarm the castle, trying to steer him. It could bring more meddling than actual benefit. Yet, if Sansa refused the wardship outright, the Vale could claim that she was rejecting their goodwill. Tyrion broke the silence. "I find it curious, Lord Albar, that you propose sending Robert Arryn away. The Vale is not so large that it can spare its reigning lord. Who would govern in his absence?" Albar allowed a faint smile. "His mother's cousin, Lady Anya Waynwood, is prepared to act as regent for the Vale. She is experienced in governance and has no ambitions of her own beyond seeing young Robert flourish. Lord Robert's education in the North would be guided by the great legacy of House Stark. It's an honor we do not propose lightly." Jon thought of Sansa's probable reaction. She'd be wary, but might see a tactical advantage in keeping Robert Arryn close, so long as the Vale advisors didn't accompany him in a swarm. "I write to my sister," Jon said. "Ultimately, it's her choice. The Vale can't demand this arrangement without the North's agreement. If Sansa accepts, then the terms will be laid out plainly. If she refuses, that is her prerogative." Albar nodded. "We accept that condition, Your Grace. Our main desire is to show that the Vale and the North are bound by more than words. If Lady Sansa deems a wardship suitable, I believe it will serve us all." Jon kept his voice measured. "I'd also insist that if Robert Arryn goes north, he is accompanied by a minimal retinue. The North will not be overrun by Vale courtiers. Lady Sansa's authority in Winterfell is absolute." The envoy's eyes flickered, but he managed a courteous bow. "Of course, Your Grace. We have no intention of undermining Lady Sansa's sovereignty." Tyrion stepped forward. A slight tilt of his head. "We'll ensure any arrangement is documented. We appreciate your candor, Lord Albar." The conversation wound down with a few more details, each carefully noted. Albar then took his leave, a self-assured air in his posture. The moment he departed, Tyrion exhaled through his nose and turned to Jon. "Clever. He's found a way to propose a bond that doesn't immediately offend your sister's independence, yet gives the Vale a foothold in Winterfell. It's not entirely malicious. This is how noble houses have formed alliances for centuries. But we should tread carefully. Jon nodded, half lost in thought. I'll write to Sansa. She might find uses in having Robert Arryn there, if only to keep him from falling under the sway of other opportunists. Or she might see it as a burden. Either way, the choice is hers. Nen. That settled, the rest of the day pressed on with fresh matters. The Master of Laws announced new guidelines for punishing bribery in the City Watch. The Master of Whispers reported quiet murmurings of a breakaway group in the Westerlands, who grumbled about the king's finances. Tyrion prepared a statement to calm them, while Jon glanced at the ever-growing stack of parchments on the council table, wishing fleetingly for the abrupt clarity of the battlefield. At midday, a raven arrived from Winterfell. Sansa's reply to Jon's previous letter was short but resolute. She had found no sign of rebellious sentiment among the northern houses, and she suspected the Vale's Whisper campaign was a deliberate attempt to spook them. Lady Brienne had traveled to some of the more remote houses to confirm their loyalty, and all seemed stable. Sansa ended with the remark that if the Vale men continued their games, she would not be bullied by rumor. Jon felt a surge of pride reading her words, passing the letter to Tyrion for his perusal. They want to test her mettle, Tyrion said softly, scanning Sansa's neat script. It appears they'll find her quite unyielding. Night fell over King's Landing with a quiet hush. A warm breeze drifted from the sea, brushing the Red Keep's walls. Jon dined alone in his solar, picking at roasted turnips and thin slices of salted pork. Tyrion was invited to a gathering in the city with Braavosi bankers, hoping to secure better terms on shipping insurance. Though neither man relished constant socializing, Tyrion's presence at these gatherings was invaluable. After the meal, Jon walked the corridors, greeting guards by name, thinking of how each corner of the castle felt, both ancient and new. He ended up in the council chamber again. The map table spread with a depiction of the Seven Kingdoms. Candles flickered, illuminating carefully drawn roads, rivers, and sigils. Jon's gaze settled on the north. How many memories were bound to that shape on the parchment? He traced the outline of the Vale with a fingertip, pondering Robert Arryn's wardship and Sansa's potential reaction. He was still there when Tyrion returned, cheeks flushed from wine or conversation. Tyrion gave a polite cough, stepping in and easing the door shut behind him. "It went well," Tyrion said, voice subdued, as though worried about disturbing the quiet. "The Braavosi merchants are intrigued by the harbor's progress. They say once the docks are fully restored, King's Landing might become the most profitable port in the Narrow Sea. That is, if we don't let the city sink back into chaos." "Meanwhile," Jon let out a small sigh. "That's reassuring news at least. Do they demand more privileges in return?" Tyrion ran a hand over his hair, dislodging a bit of dust. "A few. Primarily docking priority and a reduced import tax on Braavosi goods. I told them would consider it once we see how the first wave of reconstruction goes. We can't give away everything up front." He eyed Jon, noticing the tension in his expression. "You're still thinking of the Vale?" Jon nodded. "They're persistent, but at least they're more talk than swords for now. I'll see how Sansa reacts to the wardship offer." Tyrion set down a leather folio he'd been carrying. "We can keep them occupied in the meantime, perhaps arrange a small hunt or a feast in the Crownlands so they feel important. Distraction can be a powerful tool. Let them see the realm's progress. Let them boast a bit. It might soften their stance or stall any deeper plotting." Jon considered. A hunt might be feasible. If the rains hold off, we could invite them to the King's Wood. Let them chase boar or deer. It could give us a chance to speak more informally. "New and so on all?" "Dilemma." Tyrion gave a half smile. "Precisely. If they're busy galloping after game, they'll have less time to whisper rumors in the corridors. I'll set it up." Thus it was decided. Over the next few days, servants busied themselves preparing for a modest royal hunt. Hounds were checked and readied. Local huntsmen scouted the King's Wood for suitable quarry, and huntsmen from the Vale were invited to join. The prospect of a day in the open country, away from the city's politics, appealed to many in court. Even some Braavosi envoys expressed interest, though Tyrion tactfully advised them that boar hunts were hardly safe for the uninitiated. The morning of the hunt, the sky was a soft shade of pearl, dawn light shimmering across dew-laden fields. Jon rose early, feeling that mild anticipation of riding beyond the confines of the Red Keep. He donned practical leathers and a cloak pinned with a simple bronze clasp. No crown, no elaborate embroidery, just the gear of a northern man accustomed to rough weather. Tyrion, standing by the stables, wore a more refined version of riding clothes. A black doublet trimmed in silver, the hand of the kingpin gleaming at his breast. Horses stomped in the courtyard, hounds barked and strained at leashes. A small entourage assembled. Half a dozen Vale knights, Sir Alden with a contingent of gold cloaks, a handful of city nobles seeking favor, and 2 or 3 foreign visitors. Albar Royce arrived on a spirited gray mare, greeting Jon with polite courtesy. He wore a green surcoat, the Arryn falcon displayed prominently. Tyrion rode a stout pony, better suited to his build. Jon mounted a dark bay stallion, adjusting the reins as the horse tossed its head. The group trotted out through the city gate at a leisurely pace, drawing curious stares from townsfolk who lined the streets, eager to glimpse the king and his retinue. Jon offered a few nods of acknowledgement, though he felt a pang at the memory of how many in this city had once feared the wrath of dragons. Soon, they left the city behind, heading into rolling woodlands scattered with ancient oaks and patches of dense undergrowth. The King's Wood had once been a royal hunting preserve for the Targaryens, its game carefully managed. After years of war, the forest had grown wild in spots, but there were still boar, deer, and the occasional stag. The group paused at a clearing to release the hounds, who bounded off eagerly, noses low to the ground. Servants with horns followed, ready to sound out if the hounds picked up a scent. Jon guided his horse toward Albar. A fine day for a hunt. Albar inclined his head. Indeed. We rarely see such open forests in the Vale unless we travel into the foothills. It's good to be out of the city's walls. Jon took a measured breath, intending to keep the conversation light. But as they rode, Albar inevitably touched on the matter of the wardship again, reminding Jon how beneficial it would be for the realm. Jon responded politely, neither committing nor refusing. There in the forest, with the wind sighing through the branches, the tension felt a bit less stifling. Albar sensed it too, and he seemed content to let the matter rest for the moment. Further ahead, Tyrion rode with a pair of city nobles, entertaining them with half-witty remarks. Occasionally, Jon caught a fragment of laughter. The gold cloaks flanked the party's edges, alert for any sign of outlaws or hungry animals. After half an hour of relaxed trotting, the horns sounded, faint, but distinct. The hounds had found a scent. Conversation died as the party spurred their mounts, following the direction of the hunting horns. The underbrush grew thicker, snapping under horses' hooves. Branches scraped armor and cloth. Jon leaned low over his stallion's neck to avoid a low limb. Gradually, the horns grew louder, and distant barking echoed. Suddenly, 2 of the hounds burst from a thicket, tongues lolling, on the trail of what looked like a boar darting through the brush ahead. Albar let out a shout and urged his mare forward, brandishing a hunting spear. Several knights joined him. Jon kept pace, scanning the ground for treacherous roots. The boar, a stout, dark shape with glinting tusks, charged deeper into the woods, the hounds nipping at its flanks. Tyrion pulled his pony aside to avoid the chaos, calling encouragement from a safer angle. Jon found a gap in the branches and spurred his stallion, catching sight of Albar, drawing closer to the creature. The boar spun with a guttural squeal, lunging at a hound. The dog yelped and rolled aside, narrowly avoiding a goring. Albar thrust with his spear, but the boar twisted away. Another knight circled, attempting to flank it. The undergrowth crackled with movement. Jon halted at a vantage point, unsheathing Longclaw more out of reflex than necessity. He watched as Albar readied for another strike. The boar dashed forward, trying to break free of the ring. The hounds harried it, and Albar timed his thrust well this time. His spear took the boar in the shoulder. The beast shrieked, blood frothing from its hide, then collapsed after a final, mad scramble. Albar dismounted, carefully approaching to ensure it was dead. Jon relaxed in the saddle, heart pounding from the surge of excitement. One of the knights cheered, praising Albar's clean kill. The Vale envoy wiped sweat from his brow, looking exhilarated. Jon rode closer, noticing the hound that had been struck was limping but still wagging its tail. A huntsman rushed to tend the dog. "That was well done," Jon said to Albar, meaning it. "You handled that boar cleanly." Albar bowed his head, still breathing heavily. "I'm glad I didn't make a fool of myself before the king." A faint grin tugged at Jon's lips. In another life, maybe they could have been simpler allies, two men bonding over a hunt. But politics laced every corner of their interactions, and both knew it. The huntsmen gathered around, ensuring the boar was properly bled and would be carried back to the city. That kill alone would provide a feast for dozens. They pressed deeper into the woods, searching for deer. The tension from earlier seemed to ease, if only for a while, as if the thrill of the chase bridged the gulf of ambition. Jon kept pace beside Tyrion now, while behind them, Vale knights recounted the excitement of the boar in loud voices. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, patchy yet warm, a pleasant contrast to the gloom of the city's corridors. At midday, they halted in a glade where servants had set up a simple spread of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. Wine was poured from leather skins and flasks of ale passed around. Jon ate quietly, letting others talk. Tyrion maneuvered through the group, exchanging words with the Vale men, with city nobles, with the huntsmen. When Tyrion finally returned to Jon's side, he wore a guarded expression. "They're in good spirits," Tyrion said under his breath, which, ironically, makes them more pliable. Lord Albar's followers bragged that if the North and Vale unite, all the mountains of the East will be secure. They speak as if the arrangement is inevitable. Menon. Jon chewed on a piece of bread. They may be disappointed when Sansa decides otherwise, or maybe she'll accept Robert as a ward. Either way, they're determined to show confidence. Tyrion shrugged. Confidence and arrogance often share a bed. After the meal, they resumed the hunt. A few deer were flushed out, but only one was brought down by a city noble's arrow. The rest vanished into the forest's deeper recesses. The day drifted into a pleasant routine of riding, pausing, listening for the horns. Even so, a small part of Jon remained alert, waiting for any sign of trouble, be it from the Vale party or other dangers lurking beneath the surface. Yet nothing untoward happened. By the time the sun began its descent, the group returned to King's Landing with a successful hunt behind them, everyone showing some degree of camaraderie. News of the boar's kill spread quickly, and the cooks in the Red Keep prepared a celebratory meal. That night, Jon sat at the high table in the smaller dining hall, Albar Royce seated not far away. A steaming platter of boar was set out, garnished with herbs, accompanied by roasted apples and a thick gravy. Wine flowed more freely than usual. Toasts were made. To the king, to the Vale, to the city's rebuilding. Jon participated politely, though he drank sparingly, aware that a clear head was more valuable than fleeting cheer. Tyrion, for his part, navigated the social mood like a helmsman, steering a ship through shifting waters. He praised Albar's skill with the spear, listened to lords who pressed him about the crown's finances, laughed at jokes offered by the Braavosi guests. Jon, watching from his vantage point, noted how Tyrion's outward enjoyment never quite reached his eyes. Even in revelry, the hand remained wary. Jon silently thanked whatever gods there might be, that Tyrion served as ally rather than adversary. As the feast wound down, Jon found himself standing by a pillar, finishing a cup of watered wine. Albar approached, still flushed with success and drink, though not stumbling. The Vale envoy bowed. "My thanks, your grace, for including us in this hunt. It was an honor to ride at your side." Jon inclined his head. "I'm pleased you enjoyed yourself. Your men handled the day well." Albar stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Jon could hear. "I realize we came to King's Landing with ambitions. Some might say we pressed too hard. But I want you to know, we do have genuine respect for your sister. If it were up to me alone, I'd let Sansa rule without interference. However, The Vale has been burned in the past when it placed too much trust in alliances without firm bonds. Enemy. Jon's jaw tightened. The North was burned too, many times. Yet here we stand, trying to heal. An alliance can't thrive on fear or manipulation. Albar's gaze lingered on Jon's face. I see that now. Perhaps we can find a path forward that satisfies both our regions without force. I will keep that in mind when I next speak with my peers. Jon offered a faint nod, uncertain if the envoy's words were earnest or merely the wine-talking. Still, it was better than open hostility. Albar bowed again and moved away, leaving Jon to his thoughts. The hall's torches danced in sconces, casting elongated shadows across the walls. Servants began clearing plates, while pockets of guests lingered in low conversation. Tyrion drifted over. You handled him well. So did we make a friend, or is he simply softening you for the next push? Jon set his empty cup on a passing tray. Hard to say. If they see a path that requires less conflict, maybe they'll take it. Or maybe they'll keep pressing until Sansa agrees to something. For now, at least, we have no open hostility. Tyrion smiled, though it was tempered by caution. That's an achievement in itself. You might not relish these feasts, but sometimes small gestures like this hunt can shift the tone of negotiations. Jon reached up to rub the back of his neck. Then let's hope it shifted in our favor. I'm tired of endless maneuvering. They made their way out of the dining hall, leaving the guests to finish their merriment. Outside in the corridor, the night air felt cooler, flowing through an open window. From there, one could see the moonlit courtyard below. Jon paused, eyes drawn to the pale glow. Tyrion studied him. You're thinking of the North again, aren't you? Jon nodded vaguely. I always do, in moments like this. I wonder how Sansa's faring, if Arya's still wandering or if she might return. If Bran is well, wherever he is. The North never quite leaves me. Tyrion's voice softened. It shouldn't. It made you who you are. And that man is precisely who this realm needs on the throne. Jon glanced at Tyrion, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He knew how much Tyrion had sacrificed to stand here now, offering counsel. That kinship they shared, both having lost illusions, both carrying scars from the war, bound them in a way few could understand. They parted ways for the night. Jon ascended to his chambers, hearing a distant chord of laughter echo from the hall below. He closed his door, sank onto the edge of his bed, and let out a breath he seemed to have been holding all evening. Outside, the moon hung like a quiet sentinel over King's Landing. The city's hush was punctuated by the occasional cry of a gull or a faint shout from the streets. As sleep crept upon him, Jon's thoughts circled to the realm that lay beyond these walls. The Stormlands resecuring their roads, the Reach replanting fields, Dorne quietly rebuilding, the Westerlands simmering under old resentments, the Vale maneuvering for advantage, and the North standing proud behind Sansa Stark. He remembered the White Walkers, now vanquished, the dragons that soared and then vanished, and the queen whose dreams ended in fire and blood. From it all, he had inherited this uneasy kingdom, and had placed his trust in a Lannister whose mind was as sharp as any sword. They were forging something new here, however fragile. Each day, Jon listened, learned, and tried to balance justice with mercy. Tyrion matched cunning with compassion in a realm that rarely rewarded either. Step by careful step, they stitched together alliances, resolved disputes, and labored to move forward. It was an unglamorous work, lacking the heroics of battle, but more vital to the kingdom's survival than all the wars that had come before. In that tenuous calm, Jon closed his eyes, uncertain of what the morrow might bring, but certain he would face it with Tyrion by his side. Let the Vale scheme, let distant lords grumble, let the city watch for signs of revolt. They would meet each test. And so, in the hush of that moonlit night, king in hand continued their vigil, prepared to defend the realm they had been given, determined to keep building a future that might finally be worthy of the living.